But it just made for such an interesting bit of storytelling and made the ending so much more interesting than, hey, you guys killed the bad guys, you saved the world, all right, you guys are heroes, and that was it, like it tore my character apart. And I know, it's not for everyone. Like, obviously, having a character that becomes villainous at the end is not something you want to do every single time, or every time that someone loses character, either to sanity or whatever. But if you do it, if you sprinkle it here and there, and you do it, here and there, then it can become a really interesting bit of storytelling that no one will ever forget. Like that, what happened to that character, I'll never forget it because it became such an interesting bit of storytelling, you know? Crazy and horrible as it was, as an ending, it was a bittersweet ending. We did save the world, but then at what cost? And that's what makes dark fantasy versus heroic fantasy, is that there's always a cost involved.
And these kinds of things are what separates something like video games from tabletop RPGs, because you cannot, as much as they try, you cannot create something like this in a video game. You cannot have family bonds and relationship bonds that get fractured. You can't have that kind of cost in a video game. And a lot of people come from video games into TTRPGs, and then they play their characters in that way. And I think it's such a sad thing, because it's such a missed opportunity to create something really memorable that you can look back on years, decades later, and think, because you finish playing a video game, you may think about it in the future, or about the character you were playing or whatever, uh, here or there, and think, oh, that was a cool game. But you don't think, oh man, that character, I loved playing that character, that I created such an awesome character. It rarely happens. I mean, it happened in games like City of Heroes. You remember that? We created some really cool,
That
memorable
was
characters,
so fun.
but
I
it was
love
just
that
because of the
game.
designs and the power sets that we added to the characters. Because like, I created Jesus H. Christ, who was dressed in a loincloth, really
Santa
skinny guy with a
Claus.
beard. And he flies. One of his powers was he just floated straight up in the air. And then we had Santa Claus, yeah, and then we had the elves. And, so you could have memorable characters in that way, but you know that's it. That's all you can remember about that character. I don't remember anything any of those characters did. I just remember what they looked like and what their power sets were, and that's it. But in TTRPGs, you can remember an entire story, like a book or a movie, which you cannot do really with a video game.
Yeah, yeah. So the bonds mechanic, I think it's just so amazing because it can create so many story moments. And even if your bonds don't degrade to zero, I mean, you can just kind of explain, and you can imagine in your mind, you know, if you have this horrific thing that just happened, someone exploded in front of you, and you're like horrified, and you project that onto your pet cat. And you're thinking about the days when you spend, just at night, just you and your cat watching Netflix in the dark living room or whatever, and you're watching this horrific event happen, and you project that onto it. And then suddenly that becomes so meaningless to your character. Being able to sit with your cat and watching Netflix becomes so meaningless that next time that you see your cat, you're like, huh. And you don't know how to act with them, right? Even though your bond score didn't hit zero, it still affected that relationship because it did degrade by 1 or 2 points. And by degrading by those 1 or 2 points, it can make such a big difference in how you interact with that character, because now you're constantly thinking, next time you sit and watch Netflix while cuddling with your cat, you're going to be like, immediately remembering the blob of person that exploded in front of you, right? And you're going to be like, I'm sitting here watching Netflix when that is a thing that just happened, and
Going back and sitting with your cat, ever with that character, most likely, but just knowing that that is what's going to happen when that character goes back to see their cat. Your mind creates that entire scene,
yep.
just because you have reduced that bond with whoever it is, and your mind creates that scene for you, even though you don't even have to role play it.
Yep, and it's why it's one of my favorite mechanics, and I think it's genius design. I think the guys that made Delta Green were geniuses for making the bonds mechanic. It seems it's such a like for a lot of players who start playing Delta Green and don't know any better, it's such a like throwaway thing